Every beautiful cottage garden you've ever seen online, the overflowing borders, the flowers tumbling into each other, the kind of garden that looks like it simply grew that way. Nobody shows you what came before that. And honestly, that missing piece is exactly why so many people give up too soon. Intro, here's the truth about cottage gardening that nobody really talks about. A cottage garden isn't something you install, it's something that becomes. Those stunning gardens you admire, the ones where plants seem to spill into each other naturally, where self-seeded flowers pop up in the most perfect corners, where something always seems to be blooming. Those gardens didn't look like that in year one. They looked small, a little unconvincing, like the plants were still making up their minds, and that's completely normal. That's actually exactly right. Today, we're going to walk through 11 flowers that genuinely work in American cottage gardens, not just in mild coastal climates with dream soil, but in real yards, with real conditions, across real USDA zones. We'll talk about what each plant actually needs, what zone it suits, and most importantly, what to realistically expect in year one versus year three, because that honest picture is far more useful than another pretty list that makes everything sound effortless. I'm so glad you're here. Let's walk through this together. Section 1, the foundation. 4. Plant 1, coneflower. Picture a plant that shrugs off summer droughts, laughs at hard winters, feeds the goldfinches through December, and still manages to look genuinely beautiful doing all of it. That's Echinacea, the coneflower. And yet, every summer, I see it sitting quietly in a 4-inch nursery pot, overlooked in favor of something more immediately dramatic. That's a shame, because what that modest little plant turns into over 2 or 3 seasons is one of the most reliable, genuinely beautiful things you can grow in an American icon cottage garden. Here's why it belongs here on a different level than most flowers on this list. Echinacea is a North American native, prairie country, southeastern and central US. It didn't have to adapt to your conditions. It evolved in them. That nativeness shows up in everything: deep roots that hold through drought, cold hardiness that doesn't quit, and a naturalness in the landscape that imported plants simply can't fake. It's perennial in zones 3 through 9, almost the entire continental United States. That's rare for a plant this ornamentally useful. Bloom time runs from midsummer through fall, those iconic drooping petals around a raised central cone. But here's what most people don't realize: the plant's value doesn't stop when the petals fall. The cones stay standing through autumn and into winter. And goldfinches? They seek them out specifically. Leaving spent flowers standing through the cold months gives you both wildlife value and a quiet structural beauty that most perennials completely lose once frost arrives. Now the honest part, because this is where a lot of people go wrong. Year 1 with Echinacea is slow. The plant is busy underground, building the root system that will sustain everything that comes later. What you see above ground might look smaller than what you saw in the picture, smaller than what you hoped for. And in that moment, it's genuinely tempting to decide something has gone wrong. Please don't pull it. By year 2, the plant begins to show you its real character. Fuller growth, more flowers, stronger stems. By year 3, it's earned its space completely, and it's going to keep earning it for years to come. The patience you invest in that first season pays back several times over. Grow it in full sun, in average to lean soil. This is important. Rich, heavily amended soil actually works against it, pushing the plant toward leaves rather than flowers. No fertilizer, not much water once it's settled in. Just sun, decent drainage, and time. Plant 2, Foxglove. If there's one plant that defines the look of a cottage garden that immediately signals this is somewhere a little wild, a little romantic, a little intentionally imperfect, it's the foxglove. Those tall spires, the spotted, tubular flowers in deep purples, soft pinks, cream and white. There's something almost ancient about them. They look like they belong in a garden from a storybook, and that's exactly the feeling we're after. Now, foxglove is what's called a biennial. It doesn't flower its first year. Instead, it grows a quiet, low rosette of leaves, conserves its energy, and waits. Then in year 2, it sends up a flowering spike that can reach 4 to 5 feet tall. It blooms, scatters its seeds, and finishes its life cycle. That might sound like a limitation, but here's the thing: once you understand how foxgloves really work, it's anything but. Foxgloves self-seed freely. Those seeds germinate, come up the further, owing spring, and start the whole beautiful cycle again. After the first couple of seasons, you'll find yourself with plants at different stages scattered across your garden, some quietly sitting in their first year, others rising up in full bloom. The colony perpetuates itself and gradually drifts around the border, appearing in corners and gaps it chose, rather than ones you assigned it. And that unplanned quality is exactly what makes a cottage garden feel alive, rather than arranged. Hardy in zones 4 through 9. In hotter climate zones, 7 and up afternoon shade extends the season significantly. A position with morning sun and sheltered afternoons will keep foxgloves performing far longer than a full sun spot ever could in the South or Mid-Atlantic. After the main flowering spike finishes, cut it down to the base. The plant will respond by sending up smaller secondary spikes, not as dramatic as the first, but a lovely extension of the season by several weeks. 1 imp. Important note. Every part of foxglove is toxic. For most gardeners, this is simply a non-issue. You're not eating it, and handling it with ordinary care is completely safe. But if you have young children or pets who explore the garden with their mouths, factor that into where or whether you plant it. Plant 3 Hardy Geranium. Quick and important clarification before we go any further. Hardy geraniums are not the bright red plants you see overflowing from hanging baskets and window boxes every summer. Those are pelargoniums, tender, Mediterranean plants that share a common name, but are a completely different story. Hardy geraniums, true cranesbills, are genuine perennials, cold-tolerant, long-lived, and one of the most quietly useful plants in a cottage garden. They don't announce themselves. There's no dramatic height, no showy spectacle. What they do is something harder to achieve. They fill the ground level of a border in a way that ties everything else together. Aveying between taller plants, softening edges, providing months of gentle bloom that keeps the garden looking full and furnished, even when the showier flowers are between their moments. Think of them as the supporting cast that makes the whole production work. Most varieties are reliable in zones 4 through 8, with some handling zone 3 and others doing well into zone 9 with afternoon shade. A few worth knowing specifically. Roseanne, probably the most widely available, and for good reason. Violet blue flowers from late spring all the way through fall. Remarkably long season. Zones 5 to 8. Johnson's blue, more compact, classic color, dependable. Zones 4 to 8. Biocovo, a lower growing pink and white variety with something genuinely rare. It handles dry shade. Those difficult spots under trees, along north-facing walls, Biocovo goes where most flowering plants won't. Zones 4 to 8. Care is beautifully simple. Once during the season, usually midsummer after the first big flush of bloom, cut the whole plant back by about 2/3. It looks severe in the moment. It feels like you've done something wrong, but within 2 to 3 weeks, fresh foliage pushes through and a second wave of flowers carries right through to fall. That one annual cutback is genuinely all these plants ask of you. Plant 4 catmint. If I had to choose one plant on this entire list that gives the most back for the least effort, catmint would win without much debate. That hazy, soft blue purple cloud of tiny flowers. The slightly arching stems that spill gently over border edges. The way it makes a planting look relaxed and established, like it's been there for years. Catmint blooms heavily in late spring and early summer, gets cut back, and comes back again through fall. It's drought-tolerant, deer-resistant, slug-resistant. It handles poor soil without complaint. That combination is genuinely unusual. Most ants deliver 1 or 2 of those qualities. Catmint delivers all of them consistently, season after season. Walker's Low is the variety you'll find most readily, and it's an excellent choice. Despite the name, it reaches about 2 feet in bloom with those beautiful arching stems. Perennial in zones 3 through 8 that covers a broad sweep of American climates, including the upper Midwest and Northeast, where winters are genuinely hard. For gardeners in zones 3 through 5 who've tried English lavender and watched it struggle through winter, catmint is worth serious consideration as an alternative. The plant is different. The scent is different. I won't pretend they're the same. But that soft, aromatic, blue flowering border effect, catmint gets you there without the winter anxiety. Timing the cutback matters. After the first bloom finishes, usually late June or early July, depending on your zone, cut the whole plant back by about half. It looks rough for a week or two, then it came back with fresh growth and a strong second flush that carries through September and sometimes into October. Skip that cutback, and catmint tends to get floppy and open in the center, still fine, but not what it's truly capable of. One thing worth knowing, cats love this plant. They'll roll in young specimens and can damage them before they've had a chance to establish. Once a plant has a season of root development behind it, it bounces back easily. But in that first season, if cats visit your garden regularly, a little protection is worth it. Before we move on, a genuine question for you. Which of those first 4 have you already grown? How did it go? Drop your zone in the comments alongside your answer, because what works beautifully in Zone 5 in Wisconsin and what works in Zone 7 in Tennessee can be genuinely different experiences with the exact same plant. Those real-world comparisons from real gardens are worth more than any list. We'll be back in a moment with the next 4. Section 2, the structure and fragrance plants. Plant 5, perennial salvia. Salvia is a category where the variety you choose matters enormously, because there's a significant difference between what's at the garden center and what's actually useful in a cottage garden. The annual salvias, those bright red bedding plants in 6-packs, they're fine for what they are. But we're talking about perennial salvias, plants that come back year after year, bloom for months, handle drought and heat with more grace than most flowering perennials, and bring in pollinators at a level that's genuinely hard to match. May Night is probably the best-known starting point. Deep violet-blue spikes, compact and reliable. Perennial in zones 4 to 8. Caradonna carries similar flowers but with distinctive dark purple stems, giving it an almost dramatic quality even when it's not in full bloom. Zones 5 to 9. East Friesland grows slightly more compact, ideal for smaller borders. Zones 4 to 8. All of them follow the same beautiful rhythm. Bloom in late spring through early summer, get cut back after that first flush, and reliably rebloom into fall. That pattern contributing to 2 seasons rather than one concentrated moment is one of the most genuinely useful things a perennial can do. And the wildlife. Hummingbirds find perennial salvias and return to them repeatedly. Bees work them constantly. Butterflies are regular visitors. If supporting pollinators matters to you and in a cottage garden, it should, because that activity is part of what makes a garden feel alive. Salvia earns its place on that basis alone. In zones 4 and 5, perennial salvias can be marginal in winters without snow cover. Snow insulates the crown far better than bare frozen ground, mulching the base in late fall not to warm the soil, but to moderate those damaging freeze-thaw cycles, is worth making a regular habit rather than an emergency response. Full sun, average soil, don't overfeed. A. Ninth plant in groups of 3 or more. A single salvia plant looks placed. 3 together look intentional. Plant 6, lavender. Lavender is on every cottage garden list for a reason. The fragrance alone justifies growing it before you even get to the silvery foliage, the long bloom season, the structure it brings to a border, or the extraordinary bee activity from the moment the first flowers open. But lavender is also the plant I see fail most consistently in American gardens, and almost always it's the same reason: not cold, not neglect, drainage. Lavender will not tolerate wet soil, not wet winters, not consistently moist ground from heavy clay, not a low spot in the yard where water lingers. It declines slowly in those conditions, not dramatically, not all at once, just gradually, looking a little worse each season, until one year it simply doesn't come back. Because the decline is so gradual, most people never connect it to drainage. They try a different variety. Why adjust the feeding? They blame the winter. Usually it's just water sitting around the roots. The fix is genuinely simple. Raise the planting area a few inches. Add coarse grit if your soil is heavy. Choose a gentle slope or elevated spot if you have one. A raised bed works beautifully. None of this is complicated. It just needs to happen before you plant. English lavender is the most cold hardy and the right choice for most American cottage gardens. Perennial in zones 5 to 8 with good drainage. Hidcote compact and very cold hardy. Good for the northern end of that range. Munstead reliable and widely available. Phenomenal, specifically worth seeking out for gardens in the South and Mid-Atlantic. It was developed for better humidity tolerance than standard English lavenders, which often struggle where summer heat and humidity combine. In zones 4 and below, treat lavender as a short-lived perennial rather than a permanent fixture, and don't be discouraged if it doesn't really ably overwinter. In those zones, catmint gives you a similar soft aromatic border effect with considerably more cold hardiness. One pruning rule that matters enormously: trim into the green growth only. Never cut back into the old woody stems at the base. Old wood doesn't regenerate. Cut into bare wood and the plant won't recover from that point. Stay in the green and you're fine. Rose plant 7, shrub roses. Roses have a reputation, and it's partly deserved, but it's also partly the result of people growing the wrong kind of rose for a cottage garden. Hybrid tea roses, perfect long stems, formal blooms, those are high maintenance. Regular spraying, precise pruning, consistent feeding, careful attention through the season. They're beautiful in the right context, but that context is a cutting garden, not a cottage border. Shrub roses are different, more disease-resistant, more cold-hardy, more forgiving of imperfect care. And that looser, more relaxed bloom habit clusters of flowers, rather than individual perfect stems, growth that sprawls slightly, rather than standing at rigid attention, suits the cottage garden style naturally. The Knockout series is the obvious starting point for American gardens, genuinely disease-resistant, repeat blooming from late spring through frost, perennial in zones 4 to 9. The honest criticism: they're not particularly fragrant, and fragrance is part of what makes a rose worth growing in a cottage garden, not just a flowering shrub, but for reliability across heat, humidity, and a long season. Knockouts earn their place. David Austin shrub roses are where you go when fragrance matters deeply. Olivia Rose. Gentle Hermione. Princess Alexandra of Kent. That full, many-petaled, old-fashioned bloom shape. Genuine, complex fragrance. Zones 5 to 9. They ask a little more from you, feeding twice a year, some vigilance about disease in humid climates, but they're not the demanding proposition that hybrid teas are. Think of them as medium maintenance, worth it for the experience they create. For zones 3 and 4, where winter hardiness is genuinely limiting, the Canadian-bred Explorer and Parkland series were developed specifically for cold climates. They handle zone 3 winters without protection. The bloom quality doesn't match the David Austins, but in those conditions, reliability matters more than refinement. Plant roses with companions at their base. Catmint, salvia, hardy geraniums all work beautifully, softening the somewhat bare lower stems that most roses carry and creating that layered, lush effect that defines the cottage garden look. And whenever possible, choose own-root roses. Grown on their own root system rather than grafted stock, they establish more slowly but are hardier. And if a severe winter kills them back to the ground, they regrow as the variety you chose. In zones 4 and 5, that distinction can be the difference between a rose that rye covers and one that's simply gone. Plant 8 panicle hydrangea. Visual: creamy white panicle hydrangea flower heads glowing in late afternoon sun, then slowly transitioning to parchment pink as the season turns. Voiceover: hydrangeas cause more gardening heartbreak than almost any other plant, and it's almost entirely a matter of choosing the wrong type for the conditions. Here's what typically happens. Someone plants the classic moped hydrangea, those large blue and pink blooms. The plant looks healthy. It leaves out beautifully in spring. It grows. It fills out. And then, nothing. No flowers. Year after year. The reason? Moped hydrangeas bloom on old wood. The flower buds form in fall, sit on the plant through winter, and open the following summer. In zone 6 and below, a late spring frost after a warm spell destroys those buds. The plant doesn't know this. You don't see it happen. You just wait for flowers that never come. Pause. Let that land. Panicle hydrangea has bloom on new wood. Buds form in spring on growth that happens that same season. A late frost can't touch them because they simply don't exist yet when the frost arrives. You get flowers, reliably, every year, regardless of winter. They're also the most cold, hardy hydrangeas available, perennial, in zones 3 through 8. That covers most of the continental United States, including precisely the regions where mopeds are most unreliable. Limelight is the most widely known, and a wonderful starting point. Large, creamy white flower heads emerging in midsummer, aging slowly through soft pink, then settling into a warm parchment tone through fall, essentially becoming beautiful dried flowers right on the plant through winter. Quickfire blooms earlier than most panicle types, starting in early summer, which extends the season. Little Lime brings the character of Limelight into a more compact form, perfect for smaller spaces. And here's the thing worth really dwelling on. Leave the flower heads on through winter. They hold their structure through wind and snow. They look extraordinary in frost. That warm parchment color against bare stems and cold ground carries a quiet beauty that's different from summer bloom but genuinely worth having. From midsummer flowers through winter structure, you're looking at roughly 6 months of visual interest from one plant. That's a remarkable return. Cut back in late winter or early spring before new growth begins. Cut harder for fewer but larger flower heads. Cut lightly for more but smaller ones. Both are beautiful. It's simply a matter of what you prefer. Section 3. The natural fillers and structural finishes. Cherry blossom plant 9 Cosmos. Cosmos might be the most forgiving annual you can grow in an American garden. And I want to be clear, that's not a small compliment. In gardening, forgiving means it works even when the timing isn't perfect, even when the soil is not ideal, even when life gets busy and the garden doesn't get the attention it deserves for a few weeks. That kind of reliability is genuinely valuable, especially in a cottage garden where you're already managing a whole cast of other plants. Direct sow after your last frost date. Scatter seeds on prepared soil, press them in lightly, water through germination, and then largely step back. Cosmos evolved in the poor, dry soils of Mexico. Rich soil actually works against it, pushing the plant toward lush foliage at the expense of flowers. Average to lean soil. Full sun. Water during establishment, then relatively little after that, and it will bloom from midsummer through frost. Growing a clump of cosmos alongside something more structural, a shrub rose, a tall salvia, makes the whole planting feel lighter, more spontaneous, less deliberate. It fills visual gaps between larger plants without competing with them for attention. That combination of practical usefulness and visual softness is exactly what a cottage garden filler should do. And here's the part that feels almost magical once you experience it. Cosmos self-seeds reliably. Let the last flowers of the season go to seed rather than deadheading everything to the end and next spring. Volunteers will appear in roughly the same area. Not so many that it becomes a problem. Just enough to feel like the garden carried something forward on its own. That gentle self-perpetuation is part of what gives a cottage garden its character over years. Colors go well beyond the classic pink and white now. Chocolate cosmos brings a deep, burgundy brown that's extraordinary alongside bronze foliage. Lemon varieties add soft yellow hard to find in cottage garden annuals. The double click series brings frilly, fully double flowers on the same easygoing plant. Worth ordering seeds in late winter and exploring beyond what the local garden center stocks. Regular deadheading through the season genuinely makes a meaningful difference to flower production. But always leave that last late season flush to go to seed. That's where next year's volunteers come from. Plant 10 Black-Eyed Susan. Black-Eyed Susan is a North American native, prairie origin, and it performs in American gardens with the ease of a plant that genuinely belongs here. Perennial in zones 3 through 9, drought tolerant once established, and crucially it handles heat better than most cottage garden plants, including many of the British origin plants that quietly struggle through hot, humid American summers. In zones 7 and 8, where a lot of cottage garden advice starts to break down in the face of July and August, Black-Eyed Susan keeps blooming, without complaint. Bloom time runs from midsummer through fall. That window, genuinely hard to fill in a cottage garden, sits between the early summer perennials finishing and the asters and sedums beginning in September and October. Black-Eyed Susan sits squarely in that gap and stays there for months. It spreads gradually over time, not aggressively, not in a way that causes headaches, just consistently and generously. A small initial planting becomes a larger, beautiful drift over 3 or 4 seasons. The extras that appear where you don't want them pull out easily. The ones that appear where you do, in a gap you hadn't planned for. At an edge where something else declined, feel like the garden solving its own problems. Plant in bold groupings rather than as single specimens. 5 or 7 plants together read as generous and intentional. 1 or 2 plants read as afterthought. Cottage gardens thrive on this principle. Generally, repetition creates cohesion even when everything else is a mix. And Black-Eyed Susan, with its visual consistency across the whole season, is one of the better plants to repeat through a border. Crystal ball plant 11 alliums. Late spring to early summer, the transitional moment between the spring bulb season finishing and the midsummer perennials hitting their stride can be the most quietly difficult gap to fill in a cottage garden. Alliums fill it with something genuinely architectural. Those perfect spherical flower heads on tall, clean stems. The geometry of them, that precise globe shape, creates a beautiful contrast against soft, billowing forms of catmint and hardy geraniums in a way that makes both look better. Structure and softness, working together. Purple Sensation is the most reliable and widely available deep violet purple globes on stems reaching 2 to 3 feet. Perennial in zones 4 to 9. Gladiator is slightly later blooming, which extends the season. Globe Master produces some of the largest flower heads of any commonly available variety, sometimes 6 inches across for those moments when you want something genuinely dramatic. Zones 5 to 9. They're members of the onion family, which brings a very practical benefit. Deer, rabbits, and rodents generally leave them alone. The same compounds that give onions and garlic their characteristic smell are deeply off-putting to most garden pests. In gardens where deer pressure makes certain things genuinely difficult, alliums are among the most reliable choices. Self-seeding over seasons is part of their value. A modest planting gradually expands into a larger, naturally drifting colony. And the seed heads that follow flowering are ornamental in their own right. That dried skeletal globe, persisting on the stem for weeks after the flowers finish, leave them standing. They look extraordinary. They provide bird interest, and they're part of how the planting naturally spreads itself. One practical note: allium leaves emerge in spring before flowering and begin to yellow and look ragged as the plant puts energy into blooming. This is normal, but it can be unsightly. The elegant solution? Plant something that grows up around the allium base and hides the declining foliage. Hardy geraniums work perfectly, growing just the right height to cover the mess while the allium flowers rise above them. That combination is worth planting deliberately rather than discovering by happy accident. Honest assessment: 2 plants that deserve a fuller picture. Now, the honest conversation I promised at the beginning. 2 plants that appear on nearly every cottage garden list, that can look extraordinary in the right conditions, and that deserve a fuller, more accurate picture than they typically receive. Delphiniums. There is genuinely nothing quite like a delphinium in full bloom. Those dense flowering spikes, true blue, violet, purple, white, sometimes reaching 6 feet or more. The color alone is extraordinary. Blue is one of the hardest colors to find in flowering plants, and delphiniums deliver it at a scale and intensity that almost nothing else can match. And they are genuinely, significantly difficult in much of the United States. Delphiniums evolved for cool summers. They thrive in the Pacific Northwest, in coastal New England, in parts of the upper Midwest, where summer temperatures stay relatively moderate. In those conditions, they can be magnificent, truly the showpiece of a cottage garden. In the Southeast, the Mid-Atlantic, most of the Midwest, where summers are hot and humid, they struggle in ways that can be genuinely discouraging. They're slug magnets in spring. They need staking, or the tall spikes go over in wind. They're prone to powdery mildew in humidity. And even in favorable conditions, 3 to 4 years is a realistic expectation before they decline and need replacing. This doesn't mean don't grow them. It means grow them with accurate expectations. In zones 4 through 6 with cool summers, try delphiniums. Morning sun, some afternoon shade, rich well-drained soil, consistent moisture, slug protection in spring. They may reward you better than almost anything else on this list. In zones 7 and above with hot, humid summers, know that you're working against the plant's fundamental preferences and adjust your expectations accordingly. Sweet peas. Sweet peas have a fragrance that's almost impossible to describe adequately to someone who hasn't encountered it. One of the most complex and beautiful scents in the gardening world. And those ruffled flowers in soft pinks, purples, creams, and whites, they're everything a cottage garden flower should be, in theory. In practice, they require more consistent attention than almost anything else on this list. They need daily deadheading to keep flowering. Miss a few days and they set seed, and once that happens, flowering stops. They need training up their support as they grow. They need slug protection when young, consistent moisture. Too dry and they stop flowering. Too wet and they're vulnerable to root rot. And in hot climates, sweet peas are in a race against heat. They're cool season plants that shut down when temperatures consistently exceed the mid-70s. In zones 7 and above, they need to be started in fall or very early spring to get meaningful bloom before summer arrives. In zone 8 and above, that window can be genuinely narrow, sometimes just a few precious weeks between late winter cold and early summer heat. Beautiful? Absolutely. Rewarding? Deeply, when the conditions cooperate. Just go in knowing what they need from you. Closing. So that's all 11. Echinacea, foxglove, hardy geranium, and catmint, salvia, lavender, shrub roses, and panicle hydrangea, cosmos, black-eyed Susan, and alliums, with honest assessments of delphiniums and sweet peas to give you a complete picture rather than just a highlight reel. But here's what I really want to leave you with. Nobody talks about the second year or the third. And those are the years when a cottage garden starts to become what it's supposed to be. Year 1, everything looks like a beginning. The perennials are small. The shrubs haven't filled out. The self-seeders haven't found their places yet. The garden looks planted rather than grown. And that's exactly right. It is planted. It's supposed to look like that. Year 2, things start to connect. The echinacea puts out real growth. The catmint spills over the border edge the way it's supposed to. The roses have enough root behind them to bloom properly. The foxgloves have self-seeded and are appearing in places you never put them, which is the moment a cottage garden stops looking like a plan and starts looking like a garden. Year 3, people stop to look. The gardeners who get there aren't the ones who did anything particularly clever or complicated. They're the ones who planted reasonable things in reasonable conditions and gave them time. Plant the right things. Give them what they need. Come back next season and see what's happened. That's cottage gardening, and it works. Call to action. Drop your zone in the comments and tell me where you're starting from, what's already growing, what you're planning to try. What's given you trouble? Those conversations genuinely shape what we make here at Rooted Aura. And they're useful not just to me, but to every gardener watching who's dealing with similar conditions to you. If this kind of content is useful to you, real, honest, built around actual American growing conditions, rather than a template that doesn't quite fit, then subscribing is how you make sure you catch what's coming next. And until then, go plant something. We'll see you in the next one.